Hi, I'm Amrit and Owen. I'm co-founder and CEO of Hyperexponential, and I'm your host. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Underwriting Intelligence Podcast. Today I'm joined by Owen Whelan, Managing Director at Calibrant, where he drives insurance innovation and underwriting transformation. Owen helps insurers modernize their systems, leverage AI and data, and adopt new technology while keeping human judgment front and center. Owen brings a practical, multi-stakeholder perspective on what truly works in insurance digitalization. Owen, welcome.
Thank you, Amrit. I'm delighted to be here.
What wasn't in your intro is that what you're most famous for was being my first boss 20 years ago, as we were reminiscing about. But unfortunately, I'm not sure how much of that taught you about, apart from maybe how to manage unruly 22-year-olds. So there we are. Let's jump right in. Owen, tell me, why does a business like Calibrant exist? So you've been on the carrier side, you know the theory, right? We've all been there. Like, we see the theory that lots of the work when it comes to optimizing MGAs, doing the review of data, working out what actually could be done on the inside to help an MGA perform better, like that often doesn't end up happening. So like, what's your take on that? How does that actually end up happening?
Yeah. Thanks for starting with a tough question. That's a very good question, and it's one that we often ask ourselves, but from a different perspective. So the perspective we're normally coming at is, why don't carriers want to improve the performance of their delegated underwriting portfolios, and why are they not investing in a more sensible way to extract the additional profit out of their portfolio, and obviously engage us to do that for them? That's the reason we're asking ourselves the question. But I think there's probably there isn't one reason that really stands out to me. I think there's a few different things. Sometimes delegated portfolios are often the poor relation within a large carrier. They're seen as being kind of the low cost distribution model. They're usually low volatility underwriting returns, kind of capital light. And many times within the specialty market where we often play, the delegated portfolios are embedded within the open market portfolios and don't get their own specialist attention. Now, we see this changing. Like, many companies are now setting up functions to focus in on kind of delegated underwriting. So I think this will change, but it's changing quite slowly. Also, I think there are data issues. I think I'm going to mention data issues kind of probably quite a lot, I expect, over the next kind of little while. But I think historically and today, a lot of the data transfer mechanism is an email spreadsheet or a spreadsheet put in a file transfer kind of site. And so we have this kind of bordereau question, which a typical insurance company will have many bordereau coming in on a monthly basis in many different formats, and that problem has never been properly grappled with. And so we see insurers investing large amounts of money in bordereau management systems, but being done in a rather inefficient way. We see the focus on kind of compliance, which obviously very, very important, and on kind of premium monitoring and cash flow management. But those projects quite often don't focus in on underwriting profitability. And we see implementations that focus on the implementation of the premium and risk side of the project is completely independent of the claim side of the project, with different timeframes, kind of different project teams, and quite often when the system is implemented, the two bits don't talk to each other very well. So no kind of big reason jumping out, but just kind of, it just doesn't tend to be the focus of any individual to kind of get this right.
Yeah, the word that came to my mind when you were talking is focus, right, and attention. And it's really interesting, right? Look, when we used to work together 20 years ago, there were a couple of profit cost centers allocated to bind the business. And growing up as an actuary doing the work, I was very used to that, although I was very aware there were pockets of delegated business everywhere, right? Particularly in casualty books, you often see the kind of the delegated business embedded inside the broader portfolio. But then actually over time, you just learn to realize it's everywhere. There's pockets of this business everywhere. And unless you focus on it, it's a different job. right? It's a different job to some of the other parts of the work that need to be done.
Yeah, it is a different job. It's a different skill set. It's different data with the data again. But it's just a different way of underwriting a portfolio of business. Quite often you're underwriting the underwriter rather than kind of underwriting the individual risk. Also, there are many different names for the same thing. So portfolio underwriting is not just MGAs. In the last few years, obviously we've seen growth in kind of algorithmic follow syndicates and various different types of broker facilities and so on, which is all portfolio underwriting. And so I think if you were to say to a carrier like you know how much of your premium comes from MGAs, they'll give you a number. If you say how much comes from portfolio underwriting, I suspect they might have to stop and go around and ask, because you've got schemes and line slips and MGAs, MGUs, and all the kind of fast follow and broker facilities and so on. So it gets to a very big number very quickly. And, people love throwing around the kind of the statistic that, about 40% of Lloyd's, or just under 40% of Lloyd's is now delegated. And if you kind of throw that open to the wider London market and then the kind of UK market more generally, just delegated business written in the UK is I don't have a number for it, but it's probably, I don't know, 50, 60 billion.
It's not small.
And then you've got, that's just UK. It's growing. It's double-digit growth rate in the EU at the moment. And I think every report I see on the US MGA market talks about the rapid growth, and it's very much a distribution channel, of a preferred distribution channel at the moment for most carriers.
Yeah, very much. We'll talk much more about the trends and the future of this space, because I think it's one of the most interesting areas to look at, particularly at the kind of point in the cycle we're in a minute. But before that, I want to just go back to kind of the work that you actually do and thinking about the interface between, your clients and businesses like yours. So, what are the biggest challenges you face to doing your job really well when you drop into a client working at Calibrant? Like, maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, okay. So I guess most of our clients are actually MGAs. So
Okay,
we have insurer clients.
right.
I definitely would like to have more insurer clients, because I think that's a way of kind of addressing some of the issues we're trying to deal with in a more efficient way. Um, and there are problems on both sides. So it's I've mentioned some of the problems that the carriers have, but equally the MGAs have issues as well. And I think simplistically, I think the top three issues are data, data, and data. But again, that's quite simplistic. Kind of, I think if you ask yourself, so why do businesses get themselves into a situation where, the standard data transfer mechanism is an email spreadsheet for most of these businesses? And I think traditionally, many MGAs were broker owned and had a broker mentality, and so they were focused on kind of production and premium generation. They quite often start with kind of broker platforms that weren't designed to capture the kind of risk, the rich underwriting kind of features that you need to kind of for good risk selection, and also many weren't designed for capturing claim data. So you end up with lots of bolt-ons and spreadsheets and so on. I think many of the MGAs being set up in recent years are different. They're quite often have underwriter founders, maybe a CEO leaves a business and sets up an MGA is quite typical. And so they understand the data requirements for good reporting and portfolio management and so on. But I still see many problems in those areas, because quite often their focus is on getting started with a policy admin system. So they'll start trading, they'll have a policy admin system, but they haven't yet designed what happens next, the downstream infrastructure. And so, like, my suggestion there is, don't let underwriters decide what software is used. And so I think, this isn't an expression I probably use very often. I think this is definitely a situation where I think an intelligent design trumps evolution.
I never thought I'd hear you say those words.
Yeah, I know. I think, quite often, we say to we say to carrier clients, when you're implementing a border management system, do it one MGA at a time. So we say to our MGA clients, map out your process. You've got various inefficiencies, but you can't just. It's people. The people are too reactive. They have a problem, they fix it, but then they're not fixing the problem further down the line. So there are many good kind of consultants in the market at the moment that will help an MGA or a carrier design a sensible workflow system infrastructure where it goes properly end to end. Like I hear some MGA platforms talk about end to end, where one end is getting the submission and the other end is issuing the policy. We ask them, what about claims? And they're going to go, we don't do claims.
Yeah.
But properly design your infrastructure about, including all the feedback loops you need from, insight from your claims process back into your underwriting.
Yeah, you touched on so many topics that maybe we'll need to bring you in for episode 2. But I think one of the things that you said there that I found really interesting is this chicken and egg problem that successful small businesses face, right? Which is actually you build a system, you set up a business and you want it to be a success, but you equally don't want to over-design the process at the very beginning. So what you do is you build like the minimum spine up, and then actually, if things go well, you're almost predestined to be in this position because you'll be too busy to go and design the system that you need from an infrastructure point perspective, from that true end to end. And I think the really interesting insight that you had there is everyone thinks they have to do all of this themselves. Right.
Yep.
And so what they do is that they go, I'm going to do the PAS now. I have to do this. We talk to lots of MGA clients, the same thing. They're like, Amrit, we'll see you a little bit later. We're doing the PAS now. I'm like, great. I'm not asking you to build 65 other things, but you can at least think about the goals and the design principles and potentially get a little bit of support on building out the structure. And it's really interesting. Humans are such binary creatures, right? Is often, rather than do like the 20% that could go so far, they do 0. And this is some of the advice that I try to give to our clients. I'm like, no, totally understand. Your job first is to go win some business, right? There's no, like, HX faced exactly the same challenge, right? And in many parts of, for the record, like, do as I say, not as I do, like many parts of the tech debt that we've fixed over the last couple of years were a result of us having a success and not having thought through what it would look like if the business was going to be as successful as it would be. But if I could go back in time, I would have levered out or created some leverage in the form of some support, right, to help us design that. And I think that's just such an important thing for anyone who's thinking about setting up something in today's era, actually, that you don't have to do it all yourself. You can get a little bit of help. You can make some plans. You don't have to build. Plans are very useful to start following once things start going well.
Yeah, and even if you don't have plans, have principles. So
yes,
it's like, I'm going to make sure that every system that we acquire has certain capabilities. Everything is going to push data into a data warehouse, or the data warehouse will be the core platform, or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not a tech person, so there are probably more modern principles. But like in my mind, you want to get the data transferring effectively and efficiently throughout your organization. One of the clients, one of our new clients, we kind of started working with early on this year. They're an MGA that are in year 2 of trading. So year 1, obviously your focus is, you have to prove that the model is going to work.
Yeah.
You have to get a certain amount of scale in order to pay the bills. When you're in year 2, you can potentially press pause for a moment and say, okay, you have a renewal book. You need to focus on renewing that portfolio. But you can stop and say, well, what capabilities do I now need to kind of think about going forward? And yeah, I can understand totally why people don't get to this in year 1, but it should definitely be a year 2 question. Is think about, what's my technological ecosystem going to be? How does the data flow around my organization? How do I think about underwriting profitability and underwriting performance and feedback loops and control cycles and all these wonderful things?
100%. And what I think was really interesting about that, what you said there, is once you've got from the year 1-2 transition, you're hiring a few more people and you can put some focus in a certain place. Right? You absolutely can. So, I love the phrase, it's going to be snipped. I have no doubt about it. Even if you don't have plans, you can have some principles. I think that is a really great phrase, actually, for people to take away.
Made it up on the spot. This wasn't
There we are.
pre-planned.
Yeah, like many of the best ideas. Wonderful. So maybe let's take a slightly different tack now. You're a senior leader now in the market that's tech savvy. We're making jokes about our grey hairs. I still think I'm going to beat you to the full grey by the end. Um, but as a senior leader now with a tech kind of orientation, somebody who's always been very comfortable with technology, you face the challenge. I imagine that you probably don't feel the same pressure to change how you work as maybe some of the people in your team who are more junior, who are earlier in their careers. And that tends to come from a couple of reasons, right? Often the nature of the work that you're doing, and I often joke, until robots are talking to robots, humans are talking to humans in the kind of senior leadership work that's going on. So fundamentally, structurally, some of your work is going to be a little bit different from when we were nerding out on VBA macros. But equally, actually, the nature of the workflows that people are doing when they're earlier in their careers are probably a little bit more AI susceptible as well, even if they're human or otherwise. So I'm super interested in how AI has changed your approach to work, and then actually what that cascades down through Calibrant and how you think about Calibrant and the people in your team should be adapting.
Good question, and it might be a better one for me in a year's time when I think about this a bit more. Um, I think my daughter was teasing me recently. She was saying that my job consists of drinking coffee and sending emails, and yeah, that's about as technical as it gets most days. Most days now, but um, I guess it depends what you mean by AI. I was building predictive models and GLMs in the 90s, um, which nowadays would probably be called machine learning or something.
Maybe
And
we think about the generative AI stuff, the stuff that's really fashionable today.
fashionable today, yeah, like GLMs have been used in the industry going back to the 80s. But yeah, but in terms of large language models and so on, it hasn't impacted what we do at Calibrant a lot yet. The main impact is for coding, you get the first draft of the code from a model, and then refine it and tweak it and so on, or on scraping data.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of data in PDFs, as you might expect, or helping us tidy up data sets. We don't have a lot of standard workflows that we can readily automate and improve. A lot of what we do is bespoke to every engagement. And now maybe there's a way of automating some of those initial workflows, because every engagement involves a data component, data transfer, understanding, and maybe there's a way of automating that. But to be honest, we haven't thought about that. But looking into the industry more widely, you can see how large language models can have a huge impact on removing some of the inefficiencies, structuring data, risk triaging, and so on. Now, I think if you think about risk triage, even quite often triaging risks was which ones should the business actually look at or price up. You can now price up pretty much everything you see, even if it's
100%.
completely outside of your risk appetite. You still ingest the data, store it, price it. It might be within risk appetite in a year's time or 2 years' time or 5 years' time or whatever, but you're building up the data on what's available in the market. Sometimes I'm a little bit skeptical because, again, I mentioned spreadsheet as a data transfer mechanism, but in quite often in underwriting submissions, you've got PDFs as a data transfer protocol, and quite often you've got data going from a structured data source into nice PDFs with logos and titles and everything else, and then being taken out of that and put back into a structured data source. Now, why go through that pain? Why not just connect structured data source A to structured data source B, and just do it directly without the PDF stage in the middle? But that will come with time, potentially.
Yeah, there's the famous meme that goes around about how someone has 5 bullet points in their head, so they ask ChatGPT to make it into an email it to someone who then asks ChatGPT to convert it to 5 bullet points. Right? I think it's just one of these really fascinating things that we're going to go through right now. You touched on a couple of things which I think is really interesting, right? I think it's been incredible, to see how quickly 2 very hard problems that were probably historically seen as maybe, unconquerable or very difficult to conquer problems, the hard job of writing code and the job of data ingestion have become just really common tools and just become easy, right? I think that's been one of the most amazing things to reflect on, just the skills that have gone from, we're not even going to look at that, right? To now, do you know what? Like, if we can't do that, we've got a bigger problem, right? And so I think that's just one observation I have on what you're saying. But I think your other point, which I think is just as interesting, is like, well, there's two things there. So like, do you have structured workflows in your work? And one of the things we're doing at HX right now is like fracking the whole company for those structured workflows, right? Because I am the AI maximalist in, at HX and maybe even amongst, our VC investors' portfolios. Maybe not Andreessen, given the nature of the companies they invest in, but I'm certainly a maximalist when it comes to this technology because I'm a nerd. But fracking for those workflows is just a really valuable exercise, and some companies will be less susceptible or kind of amenable to those. But then the other one is just like making sure that you're not using AI to do something that would be better solved in a different way, right? I often find myself looking at using AI and I'm like, hold on, is that actually the best thing? There's probably another technique that would solve that. It's like ChatGPT has become so second nature now, right? Or Claude or Grok or any of the models, right? Like has become so second nature that sometimes you can end up doing things that don't lend themselves to AI, almost as a force of habit. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that, whether it's going to be really interesting to see whether AI prolongs the we should build good pipelines, actually, whether it papers over those cracks or does the opposite.
That's a very good one. And yeah, I think time will tell. I think we can pontificate all about
That's right.
all the different possible outcomes, but yeah, time will tell. I think you sent me a kind of a cartoon years ago about data standards. We have
They were key one, yeah.
Well, we have 10 data standards in this industry. We used to agree on one, and now we end up with 11 data standards in the industry. So I'm skeptical about data standards.
Me too.
But I yeah, leave it at that. I think just that's an entire conversation in its own right. Yeah.
Totally. But if we're to do the 30-second speed run on it, it's a bit like planning, right? Plans are pointless, but planning is valuable, right? And I think in a similar way, data standards themselves are less valuable than the thinking they do around the structures, the important things. It's very hard to crystallize those, and I think that's where the interface between having some standards available and LLMs could be really, really powerful. Right, where actually you can express some canonical structures which you all know are flawed, right? But now the LLMs can lower the floor or the barrier to entry of at least attempting to use them. That's an area of interest for me. As like you, I'm not sure whether we will ever end up with a perfect set of data standards, but I think there's something there.
Absolutely, yeah. I think even if we don't have common standards across the market, organizations need to have certain standards within the business in order that they can, analyze data across portfolios. You may be receiving
exactly
different formats from your clients, but
that's right.
Internally, you need some degree of standardization and consistency.
Yeah, exactly. I often use this form like intermediate representation, right, to harmonize on consistency rather than something that's perfect unto itself. Very good. So look, Owen, what's top of mind for you going into Q4 and then 2026 as you think about the role? I suppose two things: the role of the MGA market more broadly, but also the very important work that businesses like yours, Calibrant, are doing. Right, really, really clearly, there's lots of momentum in the MGA sector. Right, I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and I remember very early on in my career, just Stephen Catlin talking about like the real complex tension between driving growth and giving the pen away, right? And particularly right now, when you see top level market softening combined with pressures to grow and MGAs being a very valuable form of distribution. And then some of those other trends that you picked up, I think we could do a whole episode on the shift from the broker-led MGA to the underwriter-led MGA and what that's meant for companies like Fidelis, with their MGA platforms, so on and so forth. But I think, how are you seeing the market? What are you thinking about Calibrant's role in that? And, what are your thoughts more broadly?
Yeah. So by all accounts, the market is softening, and you can see that very much. Okay, I got a bit of a UK-centric view of things at the moment, but you can see that, in the personal lines market. The personal lines insurers made an underwriting profit in 24, like that's, and then, that's how dare they? Like they have to
Yeah.
give all the money back to the policyholders in 25 and 26. Um, yeah, and by all accounts, the specialty market is suffering as well, particularly kind of US property rates are coming back. So just looking particularly at MGAs, so as you mentioned, there is this tension between top line and bottom line in MGAs in particular, because their primary means of remuneration is upfront commission.
Yeah.
Um, in what we see is upfront commissions, in our view, are probably too high, and profit commissions are not effective enough. We see many MGAs that don't have profit commissions, or the profit commissions are set at a level where they're only paid if things are randomly good.
Right.
Profit commissions need to trigger when they meet expectations, or however that is defined. So one of my colleagues says, yeah, upfront commissions should keep the lights on, and then profit commissions should make the MGA rich or whatever, or not. So we need a better kind of contractual alignment of interests. What we don't see very much of is in contracts is what should happen when underwriting performance is not what it needs to be. So contracts set out, we'll pay you X commission up front, and we'll pay you a PC in these, if the underwriting delivers these results. But we don't see, well, if it doesn't, what happens? And are there any contractual carrots and sticks to bring underwriting performance back in line with expectations? And so one of the things that we've done is we've come up with some contractual language that some of our clients use with their MGAs, or to make it very clear. If your loss ratio hits this level, then you need to take these actions within these timeframes, and if you don't, then we cancel. But if you do this, then we can't cancel. So it needs to be balanced. So we need to, there's a sign behind me which talks about kind of long-term, multi-year relationships, and so that's what we want. We want to work towards capacity, being willing to engage with MGAs on a multi-year basis. But on the flip side, MGAs need to be able to kind of accept that if their underwriting is not good enough, then the capacity can walk away reasonably easily.
Yeah.
So that's quite a specific kind of, I guess, comment on MGAs, but it's alignment of interests, contractual alignment of interests, I think, is the key thing that we need within this kind of part of the market.
I'm going off script a little bit. One thing I reflect on when you talk about that is that, alignment of interests is always the most powerful way to drive success, right? And I think just generally in a business relationship, right? I think about that when we work with our investors. I think about that when we work with our clients. One of the things I've always seen with the MGA market, and this was one of my motivations with HX with respect to the data structures that we kind of automatically create in our platform, is this tension between underwriting profit, but also like the granularity of data and kind of ability to share the right kind of information with carriers so that they can have confidence in where they're putting their capacity. And one of the things I've seen is, like, for whatever reason, like those information flows get very kind of sclerotic or like unuseful, like very quickly, right? Like you talk to an early MGA and I'm talking to some really interesting MGAs right now because of the nature of what HX is, right? And you see the data that these companies have. I mean, it's incredible, right? Like they're tech savvy, they understand ETL, extract, transform, load. They know how to create a very rich data set that, as a nerdy actuary, even 5 or 6 years ago, I would have dreamed about being able to get my hands on. Right. And you probably see this yourself, but for whatever reason, that's still taking a very long time as kind of the information flow. I don't know if you've got any reflections or observations on why that is. You talked about the bordereau process. You just touched on that. Do you have any reflections on what can be done there and maybe why that's still the case?
Yeah, so we meet with some MGAs and they say, yeah, we're tech enabled and we can pass data across the carriers however they want it, and they're saying, well, the carriers are just not set up to receive it. They're quite often dealing with legacy platforms, and they're just not just don't have the systems in order to accept the data. I spoke to one MGA policy admin CEO a few years ago, and said they built this really awesome kind of system, loads of capabilities, and then when they were implementing it at an MGA, and then when it was implemented, the MGA said, well, I need you to extract the data and put it into a spreadsheet so I can send it to the carrier. And he went, you want me to kind of put all this data that is beautifully curated and managed into a spreadsheet? Like, he was just astonished that this was still a requirement of the carrier.
It's like going to a Michelin-starred restaurant and go, could you just put that in a wrap? All that food in a wrap for me. That'd be just really, I'd like it to take away in a wrap, please.
Yeah. Okay, can I have some ketchup, please?
Yeah.
So I know people love ketchup, but it's not one of my things.
My daughter hates ketchup too. Don't worry. It's a long-running point of tension in our house. That is, I mean, from what I'm hearing from you, Owen, the solution is for all of those carriers to have HX Renew. So I think, there we are. That's all the problems in the world solved with just that one fell swoop.
Yeah, and we can help them with their MGA oversight.
That's
as
it.
well.
The Calibrant interface to HX Renew coming soon to a technology platform near you. Well, look, I think that's a wonderful way to wrap. Owen, this has been a personally super fun one for me to do. Known you for 20 years, you taught me much of what I know. And so maybe we'll see you again. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much for the invitation, Amrit. Great to catch up.
That's it for this episode of the Underwriting Intelligence Podcast. I hope you found it useful and thought-provoking. If you did, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone in insurance who'd find this valuable, please share it with them. I'm Amrit, and I'll be back in 2 weeks with more insights that matter in the insurance world. Until then, thanks for listening.